So I'm going to have to speed up because my aim was to cover 30 mental factors this weekend, and I've only done one. So let's see how it goes. So I'll try to go a little faster, and then I will leave some time towards the end for questions. There were a couple that were sent in already, so we'll leave that to the end. So the second of the root afflictions is anger. I think we know that one quite well. So the explanation is that it's a mental factor that referring to one of three objects. So the three objects are sentient beings. So they could be either those who harm us or those who we just don't like. We find them annoying, irritating, whatever. The second object are sufferings. My guess is that would include things like discomfort, pain, hunger, cold, or maybe unwanted states of mind that keep bugging us and don't go away. And then the third is sources of harm. So my guess is that that could be things like sickness. If we're sick, we don't want to be sick and want it to go away, but it won't. Or maybe weather conditions, or a computer or a car that isn't working properly. There was this story in the news once about this guy who his computer wasn't working and he got so frustrated he took his gun and shot it. That probably didn't help much. Another one I thought of, obscene emails. I've been getting so much of those recently, and I just having a hard time not getting annoyed about that. So those are things we can get angry at. And what happens when we get angry is it agitates the mind by being unable to bear. We find this object unbearable, or wanting to harm the object or the person. So that's like full-blown anger when we actually, like the guy with the computer, we want to harm it. We want to do something harmful or destructive. And then it says, anger is based on distorted attention that exaggerates or projects defects on people and things. The Dalai Lama talks about meeting an American, I don't know if he's a psychologist or a psychiatrist, Aaron Beck, and he's done a lot of research on anger. And he told the Dalai Lama, when we get angry at somebody, we see that person as 100% bad. 90% of that is projected by our mind. And the Dalai Lama said, yeah, that's what Buddhism says too. So, yeah, this is what happens when we're angry. We project or exaggerate bad qualities onto people. So it's kind of opposite to attachment. Attachment causes us to see people and things as artificially appealing or attractive. We create this image of the object as being wonderful, while anger causes us to see them as artificially displeasing or ugly, horrible, bad, whatever kind of words we want to use. So a good way to work with that is to just check how other people see those objects. Does everybody see the object the same way we do? Maybe some people do, but some people don't. Some people see that object of our anger as wonderful, fantastic. So that's helpful to look at. Our minds create many reasons to validate our anger, and it can give us a false sense of power in situations where we feel afraid or hurt. I'm a little uncomfortable with the false sense of power because I once met a woman who was almost raped. She was coming home alone in the dark, and a man jumped on her and threw her on the ground and was getting ready to rape her. And she'd already been raped once before. It was a horrible experience, and she just felt this strong anger coming up. I am not going to let this happen to me again. And she just felt this incredible strength. She's really tiny, like 5 foot tall. She was able to push this guy off of her and screamed at him, and he ran away. So, so it can give us some energy to protect us in situations. And in that case, fortunately, she didn't actually hurt the guy. She just scared him off. But she protected herself from a horrible experience. But in other situations, it might be counterproductive to get angry. And yeah. Anger has many forms, and several other afflictions are derived from it, including irritation, annoyance, frustration, hatred, rebelliousness, belligerence, resentment, vengeance, spite, cruelty, violence, and jealousy. So some of those are actually in the list of the auxiliary, I have a trouble with that word, auxiliary afflictions we'll look at later. But some of these things are kind of everyday occurrences, just getting irritated, impatient, annoyed. And I've heard some psychologists say depression, it can be anger turned against oneself. So that might be another form of anger. And then, of course, many people experience self-hatred, hating themselves and being critical and judgmental towards themselves. So there's many different ways that anger can arise and manifest in our life and our experience. And then it goes on to say, in dividing anger, we can speak of lesser, middling, and great degrees of anger. And there's also a 9-fold classification of anger. The first 3 of these are about ourself being harmed by somebody, either in the past, somebody harmed me in the past, or present, right now, or in the future, somebody will harm me in the future. So how do we know if this person's going to harm us in the future? We don't know for sure, but our mind can fantasize. Have you ever done that? Yeah. And it could be based on previous harm. This person did this and that to me before, and they might do it again. It's possible. But anyway, our mind can get carried away with fantasies, and then we can get all worked up, angry. This person's going to do to me tomorrow and next week and next year. And the next 3 are anger about a person we care about, a friend or relative being harmed. Okay, so that's another reason that anger can come up. Somebody I care about is getting harmed, either in the past or in the present or in the future. And the last 3 are about somebody helping my enemies. Okay, so if there's somebody we don't like, and maybe that person has harmed us, or somebody we don't like, and then if somebody helps that person, they have helped in the past, they are helping in the present, or they will help in the future. That could also be a cause of anger. For example, maybe a politician we don't like, and then we hear that someone has given a donation to that person or put out a banner, supporting that person. So then that person becomes our enemy too. Yeah. So it can be very complex, very many different ways that anger can arise in our mind. And so when it does arise, it disturbs our mind. That's the function of anger. It makes our mind disturbed, agitated, unhappy, unpeaceful. And it can lead to negative actions, destructive, non-virtuous actions, and increases suffering, both for ourselves in our own lives, but also in the world. Like most of the acts of violence, if not all, um, are, occur because of anger, because of hatred. So it leads to a huge amount of suffering in the world. So I won't spend a lot of time on anger because I think you've had plenty of teachings, and Venerable's written a book about it, working with anger. And right now you're doing Shantideva's 6th chapter, all about anger and how to overcome anger, counteract anger with patience or fortitude. So here are some antidotes to anger. So it's very helpful to just look at the faults of anger, really clearly see how it brings suffering immediately, short term, long term, to oneself, to others, to the world. So really look carefully at the faults of anger and the benefits of the opposite state of mind, patience or fortitude, which is, being able to put up with difficult people and difficult situations without losing our temper and getting angry. So that's really helpful, because then even if there's a situation where we may feel justified in being angry, if we can remember, no, this is not a wise choice to make. I don't want to do this. I don't want to go down that road. And then we'll find a way of dealing with it other than just being angry. And karma is very helpful. If bad things happen to us, people do harmful things, it's the result of karma that we ourselves created in the past. So we did bad things ourselves in the past. And now we're experiencing the results of our karma. So when bad things happen, this can be a lesson for us, a reminder for us of how important it is to avoid bad karma. Don't create any more of that bad karma. Create good karma instead. And that can also help us to have more compassion for the person who is doing harmful things if we think about the karma they're creating. And they're already suffering. If they're doing harmful things, that's because their mind is disturbed. And then if they are doing harmful things, negative things, they're creating the karma to suffer in the future. So contemplating that can really help us to not have anger and hatred, and instead have compassion and the wish to help this person. And then loving kindness. So that's a real antidote to anger. It's the opposite state of mind. If we can have kindness and love towards somebody rather than anger and hatred. So the more we familiarize ourselves with that state of mind, the easier it will be to feel that way rather than anger or hatred. And the last one is try to understand the other's point of view and generate compassion. So that's really helpful too. Just put yourself in the other person's shoes. Try to understand what's going on with them. They're probably suffering, and maybe they've had bad things happen to them in their life that's shaped them to be the way they are. And so understand the other person can help change our perspective and our feelings from anger to compassion and the wish to help the person rather than harm them. So that's just very brief, but there's many, many, many antidotes, especially in Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Chapter 6. Many, many, many methods we can use to tame our anger, subdue our anger, and increase our compassion, our love, and our patience. Okay, the next one is arrogance, which is also sometimes called pride or self-importance. But I think arrogance is a good word because pride sometimes people use that word in a not necessarily bad way, like I'm so proud of my child because they, got straight A's on their report card or something like that. I mean, there could be some negative pride there, but not necessarily. So I think arrogance is more clear uh, to describe this state of mind. So this is a mental factor that, based on the view of a personal identity that misapprehends how the I or mine exists, strongly grasps an inflated image of ourselves. So view of a personal identity is going to come later. That's included in root affliction number 6. But basically, it's a wrong view of our own self, a sense of an I or me, myself, as existing inherently, independently, truly from its own side. So it's a false sense of self or I that we all believe in kind of instinctively, intuitively. So based on that, this false sense of I, um, we have this inflated image of ourself. I'll just read something Geshe Rapton says about this. And he says, although this mental factor produces an inflated sense of personal superiority, it is not a real superiority, but merely a false conceptual fabrication. Okay, so kind of deluded about how important we are, how great we are. And yet we believe in that and cling to that and feel superior. Once it arises, it automatically causes us to be envious of superiors, competitive with equals, and arrogant towards inferiors. Thus, it creates a tense and hostile atmosphere. In worldly pursuits, it may appear to be a useful quality, but in the practice of Dharma, it is only an obstacle to our development. So it goes on here to say it functions to prevent us from learning and increasing our virtue and causes us to disrespect or denigrate others. So the opposite of pride is, or arrogance, is humility. So humility is a very important quality to have. When we are humble, our mind is open. We recognize we have things to learn, we have more to develop in ourselves. So we're open to learning from our teachers and from each other. But when we have arrogance, it kind of makes us closed. And I know it all. Nobody can teach me anything. I'm better than everybody else. So then our mind is closed and unable to learn and grow. So now we have 7 types of arrogance. This is from Vasubandhu in the Abhidhammakosha. So the first 3 are related to things like material wealth, or our appearance, our looks, our knowledge, our social standing, athletic ability, and fame, and so forth. So the first one is thinking that we are superior in relation to someone who is inferior, meaning somebody who does have less wealth than we have, or less knowledge than we have, or not as good looking as we are. So in relation to somebody like that, we feel superior and we look down on them. And number 2 is thinking we are superior in relation to someone who is equal. So someone who's on the same level as ourselves in terms of wealth or knowledge or social standing, athletic ability. We still look at that person and feel, I'm better than they are. And the third one is where we think we are superior in relation to someone who is actually better than us in those different ways, who is up there in terms of knowledge or wealth or social standing. Okay, so even in relation to that person, we may feel I'm better than them. So that's really crass, really gross, but it can happen. Number 4, arrogance that regards our aggregates, our body and mind, and thinks I, just thinks I. This is also called the conceit of I am. So they use this term. I don't know if they use this term in the Sanskrit tradition, but it's used in the Pali tradition. Conceit of I am. Based on self-grasping, we believe ourselves to be inherently existing and very important. Geshe Rapton adds to this, we think our aggregates are perfect, so we're very proud of our aggregates. This is me, and I'm great. Number 5, arrogance that thinks we have good qualities that we don't have. Okay, so this is pretty deluded as well. Geshe Rapton gives the example of meditative absorptions, like, higher states of meditative attainment, jhanas, or wisdom realizing emptiness, or something like that. This does happen. People sometimes have experiences in their meditation and think, oh, I have attained that state. And they're probably quite wrong. Even when they go to a teacher and try to say they've attained that state, and the teacher says, no, you haven't, then they get angry and upset. So, yeah, that's particularly harmful, that kind of arrogance. And number 6 is arrogance, thinking we are just a little bit inferior to someone who is really wonderful. So an example of this is that we may think, in this group of esteemed people, I am the least qualified, implying that although we are less than those who are world-renowned experts, we are definitely better than the majority of other people. So maybe this is the kind of arrogance where we want to kind of, what they call it, rub elbows with famous people and great people, and kind of be somehow included in that group. We're just a little inferior to them, but we're much better than most other people. And this one can also cause us to claim status by being associated with someone who's better than us. Like, I am the disciple of such and such great spiritual master. The Dalai Lama is my guru. I don't know, something like that. So, yeah. And the last one is arrogance, thinking that our faults are virtues. For example, an ethically degenerate person thinking he is upstanding and righteous. Okay, so we might recognize some of those, at least sometimes, happening in our experience. So we need to recognize that arrogance is a harmful state of mind. It mentions some faults of it here. Arrogance blocks us from gaining new qualities. When we believe we're already top-notch, we are not receptive to learning, instead remaining complacent without endeavoring to cultivate virtuous qualities. So we can get stuck where we are because we think, I don't need to learn more, I don't need to grow more, I'm fine just as I am. Arrogance due to our Dharma knowledge or accomplishments does not plague beginners. At that time, we are aware of how little we know and how much we need to practice. But after we have studied and practiced for a while, arrogance can easily set in and arrest our spiritual growth. I remember when I was starting to study the master's program, our teacher warned us about that. He said, be careful. You start getting more knowledge and you can get more arrogance. It is, something to be on the lookout for. It is important to discriminate between arrogance and self-confidence. So this is a question that people often have, and it is important. Um, Arrogance is uh, afflicted and non-virtuous, whereas self-confidence is something we need. So it says arrogance is often a cover for insecurity, whereas self-confidence acknowledges our abilities without inflating them. Self-confident people have no need to boast of their achievements. An essential factor on the spiritual path, self-confidence should be nurtured. Thinking as I progressively practice the path, I'll be able to accomplish all the bodhisattva activities is not arrogance. So we need self-confidence, because if we aspire to follow the bodhisattva path and attain enlightenment and help all sentient beings to reach enlightenment, we have to have a huge amount of self-confidence. And so if we think we're hopeless and useless and we could never do all those things, then that will be an obstacle for even stepping on the path and trying to follow the path. So we do need self-confidence in our ability to follow this path and attain those achievements. But that's not arrogance. That's different from arrogance. So it says, this is in fact true. An awareness of our potential boosts our enthusiasm to engage in Dharma study and practice. Okay. So I don't know, for me, one way of distinguishing arrogance and self-confidence, arrogance tends to compare ourselves with others and look down on others, feel superior to others. And it's, an inflated sense of self. Whereas confidence, self-confidence in our good qualities and our potential, we don't need to compare ourselves with anyone else to feel that way. We just know that we have these qualities. And in fact, everyone else has those qualities and potentials too. Everybody has Buddha nature. Everybody can follow the path and reach enlightenment. So nobody's better than anybody else. We might be a little further along than some people, but that's no reason for us to feel arrogant, because arrogance is kind of, it's not compassionate. It's not loving and compassionate. And it can cause us to treat people or talk to people in ways that are hurtful, that are unkind. And then it says, similarly, rejoicing at our virtue with a sense of satisfaction, thinking, I feel good because I kept my precepts in a challenging situation, is not arrogance. It's a way of reinforcing our virtue. So feeling good about our practice, keeping precepts, doing meditation, studying, whatever good deeds we're doing, virtuous things we are doing, we do need to feel good about those things, rejoice in those things, because that's a way of giving ourselves encouragement to do more. This is a good thing to do, and I want to do more. So that's positive, and it's not arrogance. So some antidotes to arrogance. Again, just contemplating the faults of arrogance, what that leads to, and the benefits of humility. So we probably had experience of both of those states of mind, and we can look at our own experience and see what are the effects of feeling arrogant or having humility. And also looking at other people. I find that helpful. I like people who are humble. I don't like people who are arrogant. Of course, I should have compassion for everybody, but when I detect arrogance in somebody, I can really feel that's not a good quality. I don't admire or respect people who have that quality. But I remember once I was attending some teachings by a lama, and he was teaching in Tibetan, and then there was a Western person who was translating. And I had a feeling that this translator was arrogant by the way he was talking to the students who were asking questions. He was talking in a sort of arrogant way, and that made me feel annoyed. But then I thought about it, and I thought, actually, I think he's actually insecure. He's lacking confidence in himself, and that's why he's behaving that way. So once I realized that, and this is what it says here as well, that it's often a cover for insecurity. People who act arrogant on the outside may actually be insecure, lacking confidence, and so they put on this false front of, I'm okay, I'm fine, I'm great. So once I understood that, it helped me to not be annoyed and instead feel some compassion for this person. And yeah. So another antidote is to contemplate how we are dependent on others for the things that we have, like our very body. The body we have came from our parents, and all the things that we own, our possessions, our wealth, that also came from others. Even if we inherited it from our parents, it still came from others. Even if we worked for ourselves, we had to be hired by somebody in order to work. So we're always dependent on others for everything we have, and also our knowledge. When we came into this world, we didn't know anything. We couldn't even talk. All we could do was cry and wave our arms in the air and lie on our back. And so we didn't have anything. We didn't know anything. We couldn't do anything. So whatever knowledge we have, possessions we have, skills, and so on, it's all dependent on others. We're dependent on others for all of those things. So contemplating that is very humbling, very helpful to reduce our arrogance and increase our appreciation for others, our care and compassion and kindness for others. And then a third point is contemplate what you don't know and the skills that you don't have. Okay? So there's always things we're not good at, things we are lacking in or deficient in. So it's good to remember those and recognize, we still have more to do, more to learn, more growing to do, and so on, until we're Buddhists, until we're enlightened. Okay, number 4 is ignorance. This is an afflictive state of unknowing, brought about by the mind's lack of clarity regarding the nature of things, such as the 4 truths, 3 jewels, and karma and its effects. It functions as the basis and root of all other afflictions and the afflictive actions and rebirths they produce. So ignorance is said to be the root of all our suffering and our very existence in samsara, cyclic existence. So it's the main delusion, the main affliction that all the others do arise from. So what's given here is a general definition of ignorance accepted by all Buddhist tenet systems. However, each system has its own unique definition as well. So this gets very complicated. We're not going to go into all the complications, but just to keep in mind that the word ignorance doesn't always mean the same thing. It's very confusing. You'll come across this word ignorance in different Dharma books or different Dharma teachings, and sometimes they don't even explain which meaning of ignorance they're using there. They just say ignorance. Then you have to kind of figure it out by context or asking the teacher. But just to be aware of that there are different meanings to the word ignorance. And normally we follow the Prasangika Madhyamika school, considered the most accurate way of explaining things by the Tibetan teachers. So in that school, in the Prasangika school, when they use the term ignorance, usually they're talking about ignorance about our own nature, our sense of self, I, me, as well as everyone and everything else, and that we see everything as existing inherently, independently from its own side, objectively. In other words, ignorance of emptiness, ignorance that fails to recognize the emptiness of inherent existence. So that's what they usually mean when they use the term ignorance. But other schools, Buddhist schools of philosophy, when they're using the term ignorance, don't have that meaning. They have other meanings. So it is a little complicated. Um, and the book Samsara, Nirvana, Buddha Nature, Volume 3, the Venerable's teaching on Friday nights. That actually gives 9 different meanings of ignorance in different contexts by different schools. I just put 3 here. These are probably 3 of the main meanings of ignorance. So number 1 is ignorance of ultimate truth. So this ignorance doesn't know the mode of existence of all persons and phenomena. And this meaning is accepted by the Chittamatra and Madhyamika schools. However, when they explain what is ultimate truth that we are ignorant of, they would explain it differently. That's a further complication. But anyway, this is, in general, we could say that's the ignorance about the true nature of everything, ourself, others, and all phenomena. And this ignorance can give rise to other afflictions like anger, attachment, and then in turn, those give rise to karma, actions that we do, which in turn become the cause for rebirth in samsara. So in that context, in that role, ignorance is the first link of the 12 links of dependent origination. Okay, so that's another whole topic. But anyway, that's the explanation of how we are actually stuck in samsara, how we take rebirth in samsara again and again. It starts with ignorance, which then motivates karma, link number 2. And then karma in turn becomes the cause to be reborn in samsara and have another whole life and experiences in samsara. So that's one meaning of ignorance. Ignorance about the true nature of all things. And then the second meaning, the second example of ignorance here is ignorance of karma and its effects. So this is another meaning of ignorance that sometimes appears in texts. Ignorance about karma. This means we don't understand karma. So it says here, this underlies all destructive actions, especially those that lead to unfortunate rebirths. It is not simply not knowing about karma and its effects, but either strong disbelief in it or temporary disregard for it. Okay, so like a little child who hasn't studied karma, doesn't know about karma, their not knowing about karma isn't a case of ignorance, this kind of ignorance, but rather if people do know, like they've heard about karma, but they reject it, they don't believe it, refuse to believe it, or temporary disregard, like we might know about karma and maybe sometimes we believe in karma, but then when it comes to something that we really want to do, there's a strong impulse to do something, we might just put aside our understanding of karma and think, well, I'll just go ahead and do this thing anyway. Maybe karma is not true. I don't know. Maybe that's the kind of example of that. So this kind of karma, this kind of ignorance is particularly harmful because if we don't believe in or don't respect karma, then we can go ahead and do actions that are harmful and destructive, and we're creating karma that will lead to suffering in the future. And maybe we avoid creating the good karma, the virtuous karma that will lead to happiness and good experiences in the future. And it says there, this ignorance is also the ignorance that is one of the three poisons. So you probably heard that expression, the three poisonous states of mind, which are greed, hatred, and ignorance. Those are the three main mental afflictions, mental poisons. And so the ignorance in that context of the three poisons is this ignorance, ignorance about karma. Okay, another meaning of ignorance that we encounter, number 3, is ignorance that is the first link of dependent origination, the first of the 12 links. This starts a new set of 12 links that leads to rebirth in samsara. And different philosophical systems, tenet systems, have different assertions about this ignorance, what it is. But according to prasangikas, it's the ignorance that grasps our own I and mine. We're actually going to look at that a little later when we get to the afflictive views. I and mine as inherently existing, which is based on grasping our aggregates as inherently existing. So the evolution is first the aggregates are seen as inherently existing and grasped as inherently existing. And on top of that, arising from that, there's a sense of self or I or me, which is actually just labeled onto our aggregates. But ignorance grasps this I or me as being something inherently existing, objectively existing, existing from its own side. Okay, so that is the ignorance that is the first of the 12 links, according to Prasangika. So ignorance is complex, as you can see. It can have different meanings. And it's very important because it lies at the root of all of our suffering, all the other afflictions, anger, attachment, arrogance. They're all rooted in ignorance. And it also lies behind our creation of karma that causes rebirth in samsara and keeps us in samsara over and over and over again, perpetuating samsara. So it's really, really important to understand ignorance and do what we can to overcome it, although it's not easy. So I put down a couple of things here that we can use to overcome ignorance. First is learn the Dharma. So the opposite of ignorance is wisdom. Wisdom that understands the true nature of things. So to develop that wisdom, we need to learn, we need to study. So learn the Dharma as much as we can and think about what we learn so that we understand it better, ask questions, discuss with people so that your understanding grows and becomes accurate, and meditate. So once we do have some understanding of the Dharma, we need to meditate on it. So those are the main things we need to do in order to develop wisdom and overcome ignorance. But the second bullet point, these are like complementary practices that are also said to be important to help us develop wisdom. To have good ethical conduct. So ethical conduct is said to be the basis of all good qualities and all realizations. If we study and try to gain wisdom, but our ethical conduct is all terrible, we're doing all kinds of negative things, non-virtuous things, then our wisdom will not be able to develop properly. And we're just creating the cause for more suffering, more confusion. Cultivate kindness and concentration. So we also need to have good single-pointed concentration to develop wisdom. And kindness is really important too. One reason is that should be our motivation for cultivating wisdom is because we want to help others. We want to reach enlightenment to help all living beings. But also kindness helps our mind to be more peaceful and more positive and more pure when we are studying and practicing. because anger and hatred can arise in our mind, agitate our mind, and that becomes an obstacle to our practice, our study, and so forth. And do practices to purify non-virtue and accumulate virtue. So it's also said to be really important that we work on those two kinds of practices. Purification practices, like prostrations to the 35 Buddhas, Vajrasattva practice, and so on, with the 4 impotent powers. So it's very important to purify our mind, because if there's a lot of negative karma, a lot of negative attitudes in our mind, those are obstacles to being able to develop wisdom. So the more we can purify our mind, the more space there is in the mind to develop wisdom. And accumulating virtue or merit, so we also need to do practices to build up our positive potential that will enable our mind to gain realizations. So those are some practices we can do to gradually overcome ignorance, but it is something that takes time and energy and not something we can do immediately. Number 5 is deluded doubt. So this is a mental factor that is indecisive and wavers toward an incorrect conclusion concerning important spiritual topics such as the ultimate nature of phenomena, the 4 truths, the 3 jewels, and karma and its effects. Okay, so we may have doubts about all kinds of things like, oh, I have to cook lunch tomorrow. Should I cook spaghetti or pizza? I don't know. So that kind of doubt is not really important for our spiritual practice. Whereas having doubt about karma, having doubt about the 3 jewels, about the possibility of attaining liberation and enlightenment, and so on, those kinds of doubts are crucial for our spiritual practice and our spiritual growth. So it goes on to say, keeping us in a constant state of uncertainty about what we believe, which path to follow, and what to practice, deluded doubt immobilizes us and prevents us going forward spiritually. So we get stuck. We get into a stuck place where it's very difficult to move forward, to put our energy into study and practice and so on. Doubting ourselves, the path, and the result, we spin in circles and spend days, months, and years stuck in indecision. Deluded doubt differs from doubt inclined toward the correct conclusion or doubt wavering in the middle. So it's said that there's actually 3 kinds of doubt. Let's say with regard to the possibility of attaining enlightenment. So one kind of doubt is thinking, I don't know if there's such a thing as enlightenment or not, but probably is. Yeah, so we're kind of leaning towards the correct conclusion. Yes, there is enlightenment, and I can do it. I can get there. So that's not harmful. That's actually good, because then we'll want to learn more and study more, practice more. And then there's doubt wavering in the middle. So that's where we think, maybe there's enlightenment, maybe not. I don't know. So we're not kind of leaning either way. So that's not too harmful. But deluded doubt is when we're moving away from the correct conclusion. So that would be thinking, yeah, I don't know if there's such a thing as enlightenment or not, but probably not. Okay, so we're leaning away from the correct conclusion. And that is deluded doubt. That is the doubt that's being talked about here. Because if we don't take care of that, if we don't deal with that, then that can go further and turn into wrong view, where we actually deny, there's no such thing as enlightenment. Those Buddhists, they don't know what they're talking about. They're all crazy. They're all deluded. And so We don't want to have anything to do with this path. So that's very harmful. So deluded doubt, if we don't take care of it, it could lead to that result. So it differs from curiosity, which propels us to ask questions and learn more until we come to a sound conclusion. So actually, the Dalai Lama, I often hear him say, you should have doubts. He encourages people to have doubts because he doesn't want people to just have blind faith. A lot of people, they just, oh, Dalai Lama said so, it must be true. The Buddha said so, it must be true. They don't even think or examine or question. And that's actually not the right way. The Buddha himself said, don't just have blind faith, blindly believe, but investigate, think. So we should, come up with questions, have doubts, and ask questions to clear up our doubts. That's healthy. But yeah, it's deluded doubt when, like I said, we are inclined towards an incorrect conclusion, like denying that there is enlightenment, denying that there is karma, denying past lives, the three jewels, and so on. So we're kind of really distancing ourselves from those things. So here are some antidotes if we do have deluded doubt. Investigate your doubts to understand their history and the thoughts and feelings behind them. So ask yourself, where did this doubt come from? Did I pick it up from somebody else? Did I learn it from my parents, my teachers, social media? So, look into the background of this doubt. Where did it come from? Why do I have this doubt? And what kind of thoughts and feelings? So just explore the doubt to understand it better. So this is something I do, and I find it very helpful. Instead of just getting stuck in the doubt and believing in it, buying into it. And then second is do more research into the topic you have doubt about. So study more, learn more. I found that really, really helps. The more I learn, the less doubts I have, the more I feel convinced. And talk to teachers and more experienced students. Discuss your doubts. Don't just hang on to them and keep them quietly inside. Bring them up with others and ask questions. And then thirdly, it's helpful to remember that it's impermanent. It's transitory. It comes and goes. So I don't know about you, but in my experience, there's times when I have a lot of faith, a lot of trust. Other times I have doubts. But it's helpful to remember, well, I don't always have doubt. Sometimes I have faith, I have trust, I believe. So this doubt will probably not be there forever. And especially if I investigate it and talk to people about it, then it will go away. So don't see it as something permanent, that it's always going to be there in your mind. It's transitory. Rises from causes and conditions, and it will also go away from causes and conditions. Okay, so number 6 is afflictive views. So the previous 5 root afflictions are called non-views. And then the 6th one, afflictive views, includes 5 erroneous views. And these are forms of corrupt intelligence. So intelligence is one of the mental factors we learned last time. It's one of the object ascertaining mental factors. It's prajna in Sanskrit or sharab in Tibetan. Sometimes it's translated as wisdom. It could also be translated as intelligence. So that's a mental factor that investigates and analyzes to understand something. So these 5 views are actually corrupt intelligence, meaning they do some analysis, but they come to a erroneous conclusion. And so what they do is they either grasp the I to exist inherently, or based on that, develop further mistaken conceptions. So that'll become more clear as we go through the 5. They act as the basis for all problems caused by afflictions and all other mistaken outlooks, and create turmoil in our lives. Their antidote is wisdom, wisdom that understands things as they are and sees things correctly according to how they do exist. So next there's a little bit of more explanation about the meaning of corrupt intelligence. So they are incorrect speculations or conclusions reached by incorrect analysis. So the mind does engage in some thinking and analyzing, but arrives at a wrong conclusion. They are unreliable minds that lack a realistic foundation. They are called intelligence because they distinguish their object and know its qualities. So they do have a certain amount of knowledge, a certain amount of understanding about their object, but not completely right. They are corrupt because they misapprehend their object. Although afflictive views are numerous, these 5 are prominent. View of a personal identity, view of extremes, view holding erroneous views as supreme, view of bad rules and practices, and wrong views. So the first one is called view of a personal identity. In other texts, other translators, teachers use the term view of the transitory collection. So that's a more common way of translating this one. So this is an afflictive intelligence that when referring to the conventional I or mind, that's the mere I, the I that is merely labeled in relation to our aggregates, our body and mind. So that does exist, that mere I does exist. But this mind refers to that mere I, the conventional I, and grasps it to be either inherently I or mine. I'll explain the mine a little later. It is called intelligence in the sense that it analyzes something, that does do some analysis. Now, with regard to this view of personal identity, different Buddhist schools explain it differently. So what's explained here is according to Madhyamika Prasangika. According to Prasangika, this particular view refers to the mere I, which is just the labeled I onto our aggregates, and then misconceives that as inherently existing. Whereas the other Buddhist schools, all the schools besides Madhyamika Prasangika, explain it differently. They say that this view of personal identity refers to the aggregates, refers to our aggregates of body and mind, and then grasps or conceives them to exist as a self-supporting, substantially existent self. That's the idea of a self as a kind of boss or director or ruler of our aggregates, a sense of there's an I somewhere inside that's running this whole show of my body and mind. So that conception of that kind of self, that kind of I, based on the aggregates, that's how the other schools explain this one. And yeah, so this view of a personal identity, going back to the way it's explained by Prasangika, it actually has 2 aspects. Conceiving an inherently existing I or an inherently existing mind. So I is probably easier to understand, just I. There's an I somewhere in here. Mine is, the way I think of it is I in the role of owner or possessor. When I think this is my computer. This is my computer. So there's a sense of an I who owns this computer. I is the owner of my computer. Okay? So that's how they explain mine. So it doesn't mean, it can sound as if mine is the object that is possessed. It sounds like that, but that isn't the meaning here, because this is talking about view of personal identity. It's a sense of an I, not a sense of things, phenomena. It's an I. So I, when it becomes an owner, a possessor of my computer or my body or my thoughts, okay? So the I who is the owner of those things. So Madhyamika Prasangika says we have ignorance about all phenomena. We see all phenomena, everything that exists as inherently existing. So we see others as inherently existing, and we see the world as inherently existing. We see everything as inherently existing. But among all the different views of inherent existence we have, one of those is I. Okay, I am inherently existing. So that's this one here, because that's really the root. You know, our sense of I is so prominent, is so important. I am the center of everything. I am the center of the universe. Everything revolves around me. So our view of an I as being inherently existing is much more problematic than our view of a table as inherently existing, or another person as inherently existing. So that's why this one is singled out as a particular view. And it's part of the root of samsara. The root of samsara is believing in phenomena as inherently existing, but this one in particular is an important part. Okay, the next one is the view of extremes. This is an afflictive intelligence that, when referring to the I or mine grasped by the view of personal identity, so again, this sense of an inherently existing I or inherently existing mine. So with regard to that, it regards them either in an absolutist way. Sometimes this is called permanent, view of permanence or view of eternalism. So what that means is there's an I, an inherently existing I, and I am some kind of eternal, permanent soul or self that will continue to exist beyond this life. Once this life ends, I will continue to exist, and I will be reborn, or I will go to heaven or hell or whatever. So there's an I that will continue to exist after this life. That's the view of absolutism or permanence. And the other one is nihilistic, the nihilistic view. And that is also based on the sense of a real, inherently existing I, but it thinks when I die, that's it. There is nothing that will continue, like total annihilation of the I at death. And there's not even a mere I, a conventional I that continues. So that view is actually more harmful. Nihilism is more harmful than permanence. Because a lot of people in the world, people who follow religions that teach the existence of a soul and heaven and hell and so on. So having that kind of view and wanting to go to heaven after death, they will behave themselves. They will practice, good deeds and refrain from doing negative things, and probably engage in some spiritual practice as well. So at least they're doing some good that will bring about, if they are doing good, then they will have a fortunate rebirth in the next life. Maybe they will go to heaven. But on the other hand, people who have a nihilistic view, because they don't believe in anything after life, so they don't see any point in doing good. I mean, it doesn't mean that they do only negative things. They may do good things just because they see it's a good thing to do. But they don't make any effort to develop their mind further or create the causes for what we say in Buddhism, higher states of existence and eventually liberation and enlightenment. So the nihilistic view is considered more harmful than the view of permanence. And Buddhism is often called the middle way. One meaning of the middle way is avoiding these two extremes, not falling into either of these two extreme views. We don't want to fall into the view of permanence because there's no permanent, inherently existing I that will continue after death. There's just the merely labeled I, the mind that will continue and take rebirth. And we also avoid the nihilistic view that says everything ends. Body, mind, everything ends at death. Nothing continues. So then, what's the point of doing any spiritual practice? So the middle way, and even among the different Buddhist schools, they explain the middle way differently. But according to Prasangika, the middle way would be that the I does not exist inherently, objectively, independently. That kind of I doesn't exist. But it does exist conventionally. There is a conventionally existing I, which is the I that is merely labeled in relation to the aggregates. That exists, that functions, that will continue in the future, rebirths, and eventually attain liberation, eventually attain enlightenment. So there is a valid reason for engaging in good deeds, following karma, doing spiritual practices, and so on, to get this I to enlightenment. Merely labeled I attaining merely labeled enlightenment. I'll just try to finish these three and then I'll stop for some questions. Okay, the next one is the view holding wrong views as supreme. So this is an afflictive intelligence that regards other afflictive views as the best views. So Geshe Rapton says an example would be thinking, there is nothing superior to the belief in a self-existent person that is eternal and unchanging. There is a soul. I know it. I can feel it. I know it's there. And this is the truth. It's the highest truth of all. So if somebody were to think that way, that would be an example of this one. So you have a wrong view, and then on top of that, you think your wrong view is the best of all, better than any other view. Kind of doubly, double-decker afflicted views. And the next one's interesting. The view of rules and practices is an afflictive intelligence that believes purification of mental defilements occurs by engaging in ascetic practices and inferior codes of ethical conduct that are inspired by wrong views. So in India in the past, and probably still now, there are lots of views about how to purify your karma and how to overcome your defilements and how to get to liberation. And some of the things they do are, from the Buddhist point of view, not correct. For example, if you think you can go in the Ganges River and bathe yourself in the Ganges River and that will wash away all your bad karma, all your sins, just by bathing in the Ganges. So no, without changing your mind, without doing anything to change your mind and to change your behavior, just water washing away your bad karma, no, it doesn't work. And there were some really weird things going on at the time of the Buddha. I don't know if there's still, there were people who believed that behaving like an animal in this life will be the cause for a human rebirth in your next life. So they called, for example, there was, and this was based on some kind of clairvoyance. It was some meditator who remembered his previous life, and he was a dog. In his previous life, he was a dog. And then he thought, so my last life I was a dog, and this lifetime I'm a human being. So the cause to be born as a human being is to act like a dog. So that was his thinking. And so that was his practice, was to walk around on all fours and bark and eat off the ground like a dog, behave like a dog. And he would actually teach this to other people. He would teach, this is how to practice in order to be born as a human being. And there was another one, it was similar, but it was an ox, behaving like an ox. So Buddha sometimes met these people, and he would talk to them and managed to get them to turn around and stop that kind of practice and do correct practice. But anyway, these are just some examples of this kind of view of certain kinds of practices or ethical discipline, thinking that this is going to bring good results in the future, but probably not. Okay, the last one is wrong views. So wrong views is an afflictive intelligence that denies the existence of something that does exist. For example, karma and its effects, past and future lives, three jewels, or believes in the existence of something that doesn't exist, like a divine creator or primal substance. There was one Buddhist school that believed everything that exists arose from this primal substance. Now, that's the cause of the world and all the beings and so forth. So yeah, these are views that either deny the existence of something that does exist or believe in something that doesn't actually exist. I mean, Buddhism does acknowledge the existence of different kinds of beings, including higher beings that are sometimes called gods, but none of them is a creator. So the idea of a single being who created the whole world, the whole universe, all the living beings, that, according to Buddhism, is not a correct view. And then it says the difference between wrong views here and the wrong views among the 10 non-virtues is that the wrong views of the 10 non-virtues only includes denying things that exist, like denying karma, denying rebirth, denying the three jewels, and doesn't include believing in things that do not exist. But otherwise, they're quite similar. So I'm sorry I'm going so fast, but yeah, we still have 20 to go tomorrow. Well, actually 24. There's 20 auxiliary afflictions, and then there's these 4 changeable mental factors, which are quite interesting. So there were a couple of questions that were sent in this morning. So I'll take care of these. One is the self-centered thought a mental factor? Good question. But it's not in the list of the 51 mental factors, and I haven't seen it on any other list of mental factors. And some teachers say that there are different levels of the self-centered thought. And in volume 5 of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion, what's that called? In Praise of Great Compassion. In Praise of Great Compassion, yeah. There's some information there about the self-centered thought, page 124. And it differentiates a coarse level and a subtle level of this. The coarse self-centeredness is when we consider oneself more important than others. And that kind of self-centered thought can lead to non-virtuous actions. I mean, you think, I'm more important than others, so I can kill them and steal from them and be nasty to them and so on. So that's like a really coarse, gross level of self-centeredness. But then there's subtler levels. And the subtlest level is the mind that seeks liberation for ourselves alone. Because it's said that arhats, those who have attained nirvana, still have self-centeredness, but they don't have any more afflictions. They don't have ignorance. They've completely eliminated ignorance and all the other afflictions. So how can they still be self-centered? This is a question that often comes up. So in the case of the arhats, the self-centered thought is this attitude, yeah, I just want to take care of myself, my own liberation, my own attainment of nirvana. And it prevents them from entering the bodhisattva path and going to enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's kind of a very subtle level of self-concern that obstructs the development of bodhicitta and taking on the bodhisattva's commitment to work for enlightenment to help all living beings.
I noticed some teachers or scholars, practitioners, mostly from the Drepung point of view or school, talk about attachment to self, self-centeredness as attachment to self, and then it makes it sound like an affliction. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it can't be an affliction in the case of the arhats because they don't have any more afflictive mental states. So if they use the word attachment, then it probably isn't this gross type of attachment, but just, I mean, in this book, Samsara, Nirvana, Buddha, Nature, under the topic of attachment, when it explains attachment, it explains that the words like attachment and craving are sometimes used in the teachings for states of mind that are not really afflictive. Yeah. So the one example I remember is I think it happened at the time of the Buddha. There was a community of practitioners, and one person attained nirvana, and another person felt craving. I want to attain that too. And I think the word craving was used, but it wasn't really a negative thing because it just pushed them to practice harder, and then they did attain nirvana. So it just mentions different cases where words like attachment and clinging and craving are used, but not in a negative sense. So that could be another example. Attachment to self of an arhat. It's not real full-blown attachment, but just a lack of real concern for others in the sense of not wanting to take that step into the bodhisattva's path. And speaking of attachment, the next question is, can we take refuge in the good qualities of the teacher and not be attached to them? Yes, definitely. And in fact, I think if you do have admiration for good qualities of a teacher, that isn't attachment. I think that's faith. That's faith. Faith is when you recognize good qualities, and you may also want to emulate those good qualities yourself. So that's faith, not attachment. But attachment can arise with regard to teachers. For example, wanting attention. I want the teacher to pay attention to me, to notice me, to be nice to me. And that in turn can lead to jealousy if the teacher's giving attention to somebody else, spending more time with somebody else, then jealousy can come up. So painful. So it is possible to have attachment to teachers, and sometimes you may not notice it until you have those kinds of experiences, or until you fall apart when your teacher goes away for a couple of weeks and they're not there, and you feel like, ah. So maybe there's some attachment there. So it is something we need to be careful of and work on. The next question, what clues can I look for in this life that can give me an idea as to who I was in my past life? So there's a saying that Tibetans have, if you want to know what you were in your past life, look at how you are now. If you want to know what you will be in your next life, look at what you're doing now. So we can, if we understand karma and the causes of like a human life, we can understand that just the fact that we have a human life, a human body, means we must have created good karma, in particular ethics, practiced ethics. And if we have resources, we must have practiced generosity. And if we're not horribly ugly, we must have practiced patience. So, yeah, the more we learn about karma, the more we can understand what we must have done in past lives to have what we have now. And if we want to have, this same kind of body and and conditions, circumstances in future lives, then we need to engage in those practices now. Okay, so one more, I think we have time for. What about all the scientific evidence which points to the brain and the mind being the same thing? Does anyone actually believe that the brain and the mind are the same? I thought the belief is that mind is produced by the brain. It's a product of the brain, isn't it? But not exactly the same thing. So, Buddhism would agree that the brain and the mind are interdependent and affect each other. I mean, that's obvious. If something happens to the brain, it does affect our mind. But also, if something happens to our mind, it can affect our brain. Like studies show that cultivating compassion and kindness have an effect on the brain. So they do affect each other, but that doesn't mean they're the same thing. Doesn't mean that. I like to think of the brain being like the hardware and the mind being like the software. Something like that. That's a rough analogy. But also, I recommend looking at the evidence that points to the mind being able to exist and function independent of the brain. So there's near-death experiences, and there's a really good book called Proof of Heaven by Ibn Alexander. So he's a neurosurgeon. He knows all about the brain. And he got really ill. He was in a coma. There was some kind of, I don't know, some kind of infection in his brain. Some weird, rare infection got into his brain, and his brain was being destroyed. And he was in a coma for a week, and then he survived miraculously. And during that time, he had these amazing experiences, just like incredible, beautiful, spiritual, life-changing experiences. And so in the book, he describes this whole um, part of his life. And at the end of the book, he tries to analyze what could have caused those experiences, because scientists and doctors usually say that, oh, near-death experiences are just caused by some part of the brain, something happening in the brain, even though it seems like the brain has shut down, but there's something going on in there. So he analyzed all the different possible explanations to account for the experiences he had. And he said, there's no way. There's no way that his brain, in the state that it was, could have produced those experiences. So that's interesting to look at if you're open to that kind of thing. It's called Proof of Heaven. We have it in our library. Quite interesting.
From a Prasangika perspective, why isn't the first link view of personal identity versus the broader category of ignorance?
Well, it's included. I mean, the first link is, belief in inherent existence. So it does include belief in our own self as inherently existing, but also in other phenomena inherently existing. So my understanding is, it's all included in the first link, both grasping at ourself as well as grasping at our aggregates and grasping. It's mainly grasping at ourself and our aggregates, our body and mind. That's the main component of the first link that leads us to do actions that create rebirth and so on. Why, I don't know. You can ask Chandrakirti. But yeah, there's something in his text about that, about what is the root of samsara. And he does say both of those are both grasping at our aggregates, which is grasping at phenomena, as well as grasping at the I. They're both root of samsara.